My talk, I started with my early days as a street performer. I used to be a living statue, you know, one of those. You guys are from near LA, you probably see that shit all the time, right? Okay. So I did that for about 5 years. I stood in the street and painted white like a bride. And when people gave me money, I came to life and gave them a flower, and I looked people in the eye. And I had these really profound connections with people. And I go on I'm just gonna summarize my talk, but basically the fact that people paid me what they wanted, and it didn't matter if they put a nickel in or 20 bucks, we had this great human exchange. And then I started my band. My band got really successful, but even as my band was being successful, I couch surfed a lot. I crowdsource a lot. I use Twitter a lot. I stay at my fans' houses. You know, our fans come backstage and feed us. There's a lot of give and take. And I Kickstartered a record that came out in September. And it was the biggest music crowdfunding project to date. It was funded to about $1.2 million. And the whole music industry was so confused, because they were like, well, how is this possible? Like, the music business is tanking, and Amanda, you encourage piracy and downloading and torrenting. Like, how did you make these people pay for music? And my theory is that I didn't make them, I asked people. And I had a relationship with all of my fans because we do a lot of helping each other. And I don't think the music industry is tanking. I don't think it's the end of musicians being able to get paid. But I think the paradigm is shifting, and musicians and audiences kind of need to walk towards each other a little bit in order to help each other, because we're so used to the middleman and the labels and the record stores and having this exchange where like a CD costs 15 bucks. But if you go back to the dawn of human time and musicians and what their role in society was, they were connectors and communicators and openers, and you know, they weren't rock stars. They weren't untouchable famous people. So I'd like to open the floor, because can I ask one more question? Who in here just knows who I am or has seen me play? Okay. Hi, Aubrey. I'd like to I didn't get to do this at TED. I'd like to just actually talk to you guys and take questions specifically from the people who saw my talk. If there's things you really want to ask, and I asked Twitter if people had any questions, and I got a couple of good ones. So I can bounce back and forth between taking questions from the room and taking questions from Twitter, but I'm here for you guys. I'd like to talk to you. So ask me something. Who's got a question? Someone has to have a question. Over here. Yeah. You mean in general? Well, so the question is it scary giving yourself to your fans? Do you mean like crowdfunding, and how do you get there? Yeah, a lot of artists ask me this, and a lot of musicians ask me this. I think my history as a street performer has a lot to do with it, because I've played in, you know, huge stages, playing to 5,000 people, opening up for Nine Inch Nails, like looking out, and actually nothing's scarier than standing up on a box in the street and knowing that anything can happen to you, and you're basically just like saying, okay world, like let's go, let's do this thing, and there's no safety. The stage actually, after being in the street for a couple years, the stage seems very comfy. And you know, it's safe, people paid to be there, they actually like you maybe, or they've heard of you. And in the street, it's just like this sea of humanity passing by you, not necessarily interested. Most people not interested. Like, being a street performer is a great exercise in learning how to be ignored by pretty much everybody, except for the few people who wander over and are like, oh, I like what you're doing, which is kind of how it feels to be a musician on the internet. You know, so that, I mean, to get to your question more, I think my personality is definitely suited to do a lot of crowdsourcing and a lot of asking. And this is something that I didn't get to address in my TED Talk, which I wish I could have, which I can address now, which is, well, this is easy for you to say, like, you're Amanda fucking Palmer, you love showing your tits, you're an exhibitionist, you know, easy for you to say, but what about the PJ Harveys and the, you know, the Cat Powers and the musicians who are really introverted and shy? It's not like their music isn't great. So if everyone's like rah-rah crowdfunding, rah-rah Kickstarter, what about those artists who have powerful voices but aren't, you know, showmen? And I think that's a really interesting, important question. And I mean, there isn't a specific answer other than to say, when you do discover those artists, you have to help them even more. And if you know, if a shy artist or a, you know, non-internet savvy or non-social media frenzied artist, you know, is trying to do a Kickstarter or a crowdfund or promote a show, it's sort of the audience's responsibility, if you love their music, to kind of go out and be the megaphone on their behalf. Because sorry, forgetting not to swear, are there children here? Who the fuck else is gonna do it? So, you know, but I don't know if I directly answered your question, but yeah, over here.
So, I have a question about the crowdfunding, in that what you did successfully, or Louis C.K. or Radiohead did selling it after the fact, it represents a powerful new model, but the people that have done it successfully, I'm aware of, first established success through conventional means. Is this really viable for people that aren't known?
That's a really good question. So I get asked this all the time, and often criticized, because people, so the assumption is crowdfunding can work for someone like me, someone like Radiohead, because we are riding on the success of the old major label system. I was on a major label. I had a terrible relationship with my major label, as many people know, and I fought very hard to get off. But they did, to their credit, do a very good job promoting my band, the Dresden Dolls. Our first record was heavily promoted in America and Australia and Europe. And our success, I mean, we were already a successful band when we signed, which I think is important to point out. We were successful in Boston and New York and Worcester, Massachusetts. We hadn't toured a lot. But they did give us a huge lift. And, you know, Radiohead clearly got a lot of major label push in the 90s. But I know two things to add to this that are important. One is, I know unknown bands who have had no major label help, who've started from the grassroots, connecting with their fans, using social media, who have had really successful crowdfunding projects. It's just a fact. Bands have done that. You don't need someone fancy, some middleman, to come put you up on a pedestal so you can fly off. Like, you can climb up there. It takes time, though. The other thing is, I forget who it was, and I don't want to say it wrong, but there was a guy who was a lead singer of a huge 90s band. I want to say it was Counting Crows or something, you know, something like, I've never heard the music. Man rock, some man rock, like, lead singer dude who was on a giant label with one of those giant behemoth 90s bands, who had sold something, his band had sold 15 million records. But this guy did a crowdfunding project a year ago, 2 years ago. But this guy, whoever he is, hadn't stayed connected with his fans, wasn't on social media, didn't use Twitter, just didn't really have an internet presence, which is fine. He doesn't have to. But he went to crowdfund, and it failed. So it's not like being on a major label and then going and doing a Kickstarter means that you're going to instantly have support. It doesn't really work that way. Your fans have to want to help you and be connected with you in some way. No, and it's totally possible that someone like, I don't know, who's someone from the 90s who's just disappeared, like some artist who has had no internet presence from the 90s who's disappeared and has never come back. Seal. Okay, so if Seal put up a Kickstarter tomorrow and the goal was $1 million, do you think Seal would hit that goal? Do you think enough people would jump right in and care about him and want to crowdfund the record? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I know it's definitely not a given. So actually the first Kickstarter project I did was I produced another artist's record. This kid, Tristan Allen, who's an insanely talented piano player who I literally met in the street, and he didn't have any recordings of his stuff, and I was like, let's do a Kickstarter, go into his studio. Like a month later, we went into his studio. The whole album cost like $3,000. Just to literally be able to give him a recording of his music. And then he printed up a bunch of copies, and you know, I didn't even pay myself. But it was good. I got paid in experience using Kickstarter, and I think our goal was a couple $1,000s. It was overfunded. And then me and my husband, Neil Gaiman, who I'm sure some of you guys know, he's a great writer. There's my plug for my husband. We went on a tour together and crowdfunded the recording of the tour, which again was a larger number. I think we asked for 30,000 or something, and we got 100,000. So it did grow, and it is very important. There's a lot of musicians ask me for advice about their Kickstarters, because it is an art, how to ask and how to package and what goal to set and how long. And it's very important to not ask for too much. It's much better to be wildly overfunded than to just not barely make it. So when I asked for $100,000 on my Kickstarter, I asked for that because I knew I would get it. I was like, if everyone dies and all the bad things happen and there's power outages all month, like, I'm sure I can still get $100,000 from my fans, and hopefully a lot more, but I picked the rock bottom number that I knew even if it was some weird failure, I would probably still get. So, does anyone else have a question down here? Can you use the mic?
Hey, thanks for coming. I loved your talk. So I want to build something that makes it possible for people to share things besides their couches the way they share on Couchsurfing. And Couchsurfing is so massively successful at creating culture that changes everything. And I want to know if you're really good at using this stuff. You really get it from a technological perspective. I wonder if you have any advice into the insight of why Couchsurfing works and how other things can be more like Couchsurfing to support the models that you suggest, because I agree, that's where it's going.
Thanks. Well, I like staying with people. I would prefer usually to stay with a human being in a house or with a family, or what I think of as a real place, as opposed to a hotel. You know, I have enough money nowadays that I don't always have to couch surf, but I still often do it out of choice, because being in hotels is lonely. And it's also, when you think about it, really wasteful. If there is literally a room next door with a bed in it, especially if there's a cat and a nice person and some tea. But I talked to the guy from couchsurfing.com was at TED, and we got to talk, and I love seeing what's happening with the internet right now, because there's so much bad shit on the internet, and so many people are so mean. You know, like, you can just lose faith in humanity looking at YouTube comments. But it's really beautiful to see things like strangers offering each other rides, and strangers offering each other places to stay, and strangers offering to help each other. And that is the beauty of the internet, is, you know, we can like take back our humanity and start trusting each other. And I think that's incredible, and looking at the internet as a way to harness what we can share with each other and do for each other and with each other, especially with a tanking economy and a climate in danger, and all of the things that we waste, and all, you know, and looking on the highway at a gazillion people all alone in their cars. Like, it's like we have the internet. We've got to be able to do a better job at this. So I've got 1 minute left. Does anyone have a very quick question over here?
I am curious where you still find yourself struggling. Like, what's your edge of stuff that you ask for? And how do you push yourself past that point?
Okay, I'll try to answer that quickly, but you gave me such a juicy question. I hate you. One of the things that I cut from my TED Talk because I didn't have enough time, but I was so excited to say it because it was so scary for me to get up and say. And I was like, wow, if I can get on a stage in front of this many people at TED and say this, I'm going to give it to Bill. One of the scariest things that happened to me this year was that I had to ask my husband for money. And I freaked out because I was like, oh my God, I'm Amanda Palmer. I've had this giant Kickstarter. You know, my Kickstarter happened and all my friends thought I was rich, and then people got angry at me for still crowdsourcing musicians, and I was like, I was all over the place. And in the midst of all this, my best friend got cancer, and I had to cancel my entire spring tour to stay with my best friend. But it also meant that I was going to lose a lot of money, and you know, my business was all wonky, and I had to ask Neil to borrow money, and I was like, I can kickstart a record for $1.2 million and take help from 25,000 people, but I had such a hard time asking because I felt like, you know, I was independent DIY Amanda Palmer on top of the world, but I still had to ask my husband for a loan. And actually, once I got over it and I asked him, and he was like, of course, I love you, you know, we're married, this is crazy, why are you even? But, you know, I grew up with a very, very strong, hardworking mother and who ran the household, and I had issues around it. It was actually one of the best things for our marriage. Like being able to fall into him and trust him and let him help me was actually like changed our lives. So thank you for asking that, because I'm glad I got to say it. And thank you guys, and thank you, Bill. This is really awesome. I'm so glad this exists.
That was great. Thank you. Please stick around here. Charlie Knox next. Yeah.